You ever notice how your grandmother's garden just worked? No fancy soil tests, no 15 different fertilizers lined up on a shelf, no app telling her when to water. She just walked outside, looked at her plants, and somehow everything grew like it had been doing it for 100 years. Because it had. Today I'm showing you 9 plants she almost certainly grew that most modern gardeners have completely forgotten about. And I mean completely. You won't find these at a big box garden center. You won't see them trending online. But stick around, because number 4 on this list is something your grandmother probably grew without even thinking of it as a garden plant. And number 7 still outperforms almost everything sold at nurseries today. For a reason nobody bothers to explain anymore. Hey there, garden friend. If this is your first time here, welcome. We talk about real, practical, old-fashioned gardening wisdom here. The kind that actually gets results without costing you a fortune or a weekend of frustration. And if you've been here before, you know exactly what I mean. Before we dig in, if you want more videos like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We post every week, and I genuinely don't want you to miss what's coming. Alright, let's get into it. Number 9, the 4 o'clock flower. If you grew up around a grandmother's garden, there's a real chance you remember this one even if you never knew its name. The 4 o'clock flower, sometimes called the Marvel of Peru, was an absolute staple in older gardens for one very specific reason. It opens its blooms in the late afternoon, right around 4 o'clock, just like the name says, and fills the evening air with a sweet, almost citrusy fragrance. Grandmothers loved this plant because it gave them something to look forward to at the end of a long day. You'd be out watering in the evening, and suddenly the whole yard would smell different. That timing wasn't an accident either. The flowers close up during the hottest part of the day to protect themselves, then open again as things cool off, which made this an incredibly low-maintenance plant for someone who didn't have time to babysit delicate blooms all afternoon. Here's what modern gardeners forgot. This plant reseeds itself aggressively and comes back year after year from the exact same root, called a tuber, that can actually overwinter in the ground in many climates. Once you plant it, you're not replanting it. It does the work for you. The flowers come in shades of pink, red, yellow, and white, sometimes even multiple colors on the same plant, which always made grandmother's front beds look like something out of a postcard by midsummer. Modern gardeners skip this plant because it's not sold in flashy six-packs at the big chain stores, and because it doesn't fit the Instagram aesthetic of perfectly curated, color-coordinated beds. But if you want a plant that requires almost no care, comes back reliably, and gives you a genuinely magical evening experience in your yard, the 4 o'clock flower still does something almost nothing else on the market does. It rewards patience and time of day instead of constant attention, which is exactly the kind of gardening grandmothers were good at. Number 8, the hollyhock. If you picture an old farmhouse with flowers growing right up against the porch or the side of a barn, you're picturing hollyhocks, even if you didn't know the name. These towering flower spikes, sometimes reaching 6 to 8 feet tall, were everywhere in older gardens because they did something incredibly practical. They grew where almost nothing else would. Hollyhocks thrive in poor soil, tight spaces, and against structures, which is exactly why grandmothers planted them along fences, foundations, and outbuildings. They didn't need a dedicated garden bed. They just needed a narrow strip of dirt and some sun. The flowers themselves come in nearly every color you can imagine, and older varieties often had this slightly ruffled, almost old-world look that newer hybrid flowers don't really replicate. Here's the part modern gardeners forgot completely. Hollyhocks are biennial, which means they grow leaves the first year and don't flower until the second year. Then they reseed themselves and the cycle continues indefinitely. That's a foreign concept to a lot of people now who expect instant results from a plant the same season they buy it. But grandmothers understood the rhythm. You plant once, you wait, and then you have hollyhocks coming back in that same spot essentially forever. Because the seeds drop and germinate right where the parent plant was growing. They also attract hummingbirds and bees in huge numbers because of how tall and open the flowers are. The reason hollyhocks disappeared from a lot of modern yards isn't because they stopped working. It's because they require a kind of patience that doesn't match buying a flat of annuals and seeing blooms by next weekend. But if you have any narrow, awkward space along a fence or wall that you don't know what to do with, this plant solves that problem in a way almost nothing else can. Number 7, the comfrey plant. This one is going to surprise a lot of you, because comfrey isn't really grown for how it looks. It's grown for what it does for everything else in your garden. And that's exactly why grandmothers who grew their own food almost always had a patch of it somewhere on the property. Comfrey has incredibly deep roots, often several feet down, which means it pulls up nutrients from way below the reach of most other plants. Specifically, it pulls up potassium and other minerals that get locked deep in the soil. Grandmothers would cut the big, fuzzy leaves, let them wilt down, and use them directly as mulch around tomatoes, squash, and other heavy-feeding vegetables. As the leaves broke down, they released all of those deep nutrients right back into the topsoil where the vegetable roots could actually use them. Some gardeners would even soak the leaves in a bucket of water for a few weeks to make a liquid feed, which smells genuinely terrible but works incredibly well as a free homemade fertilizer. Here's why comfrey earns its spot at number 7 and outperforms a lot of what's sold at nurseries today. It's nearly indestructible. It comes back from the smallest piece of root left in the ground. It tolerates poor soil, drought, and neglect. And it keeps producing huge leaves multiple times per growing season that you can keep cutting back. Modern gardeners forgot about comfrey because it's not something you eat directly in most varieties. And it doesn't have flashy flowers. So it doesn't sell well on a garden center shelf next to plants people buy for looks. But if you grow any vegetables at all and you want a free, endlessly renewable source of fertilizer growing right in your yard, comfrey does something that no bag of store-bought fertilizer can match, because it's pulling those nutrients from the ground for free every single season without you doing anything extra. Number 6. The bachelor's button. Also called cornflower, this was one of those plants that showed up in nearly every older garden almost by accident, because it grows so easily from seed that it practically plants itself. The flowers are a striking, almost electric blue, though you'll also find pink, white, and purple varieties, and grandmothers loved them because they were cheerful, cheap, and bloomed for months without any fuss. Here's what made this plant a staple. You'd scatter the seeds directly in the soil in early spring, barely cover them, and within weeks you'd have seedlings, and within a couple months, blooms that kept coming all summer if you just snipped off the spent flowers. No starting seeds indoors, no transplanting, no babying. Just scatter and wait. Bachelor's buttons were also a favorite for cutting and bringing inside, because the flowers actually dry beautifully and hold their color, which meant grandmothers would use them in dried flower arrangements that lasted through the winter. The other thing that made this plant so beloved was that bees and beneficial insects love it, which meant having a patch of bachelor's buttons growing near your vegetable garden actually helped pollinate everything else nearby. Modern gardeners forgot about this one mostly because it got pushed aside by flashier, more heavily marketed annuals that garden centers can sell for a higher price per pot. Nobody makes much profit selling you a packet of seeds for $2 when they can sell you an already blooming 6-pack for $15. But if you want color that requires almost zero investment and almost zero effort, and you don't mind a little bit of patience while it grows from seed, bachelor's buttons still do exactly what they did 60 years ago, reliably and for almost nothing. Alright, quick pause here. If you're finding value in this, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who'd enjoy bringing some of these old-fashioned plants back into their own gardens. And if you've got a memory of your own grandmother's garden, something she grew that you still think about, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear what's stuck with you all these years. Alright, let's keep going, because the next few might be the most forgotten of the whole list. Number 5. The larkspur. If hollyhocks gave grandmother's garden height along the fences, larkspur gave it height in the middle of the flower beds, with tall spikes of densely packed blooms in deep blues, purples, pinks, and whites that looked almost like delphiniums but were far easier to grow. Larkspur was a cool season favorite, meaning it was often planted in fall or very early spring, and it would shoot up and bloom before the real heat of summer arrived, which made it perfect for regions with hot summers where other tall flowers would struggle. Grandmothers liked larkspur because it self-seeded reliably, dropping seed at the end of the season that would germinate the following fall or early spring without any help, meaning a single planting could populate a bed for years. The flowers were also fantastic for cutting, lasting a long time in a vase, and they had this old-fashioned cottage garden look that doesn't really show up in modern landscaping trends, which lean toward more uniform, low-maintenance ground covers and shrubs instead of tall cutting flowers. Here's the detail most people don't know. Larkspur is closely related to delphinium, but it's significantly more heat and drought tolerant once established, and far less fussy about soil. That made it the practical choice for someone who wanted that tall, dramatic cottage garden look without delphinium's reputation for being difficult. Modern gardeners forgot about larkspur because cool season annuals in general fell out of fashion as garden centers shifted toward selling plants that bloom immediately in late spring when foot traffic is highest. Few people are thinking about their flower beds in October, when larkspur seed should actually go in the ground. But if you want dramatic height and color in early summer before most other flowers even get started, and you're willing to plant at the right time of year instead of the convenient time, Larkspur still delivers exactly what it always did. Number 4. And this is the one I mentioned at the start, the kitchen windowsill herb garden, specifically things like chives, parsley, and a pot of mint kept right by the kitchen sink. I want to be clear about why this counts as a forgotten plant practice rather than a single plant, because it represents something modern gardeners have almost entirely lost. Your grandmother very likely didn't think of this as gardening at all. It was just how the kitchen worked. A small pot, or even just a jar of water with chives or parsley sitting on the windowsill, snipped fresh whenever a recipe called for it. No trip to the store for a $5 plastic container of herbs that would wilt in 3 days anyway. Here's why this earns a spot on the list, even though it sounds almost too simple to matter. These specific plants thrive on neglect and constant harvesting in a way that almost nothing else does. Chives get cut down to an inch and come right back within a couple weeks. Parsley keeps producing new growth as long as you keep snipping the outer leaves. Mint, famously, will take over an entire garden bed if you let it, which is exactly why grandmothers almost always kept it isolated in its own pot, a detail that modern gardeners frequently get wrong when they plant mint directly in the ground and then spend years fighting it. The reason this practice disappeared isn't that it stopped working, it's that convenience culture shifted toward buying pre-packaged herbs at the grocery store. Even though a single $4 herb plant will outproduce dozens of those plastic clamshell containers over the course of a single growing season, if you want to bring back one piece of forgotten kitchen wisdom that costs almost nothing and pays for itself almost immediately, this is genuinely the easiest one on the entire list to start today, this afternoon, with a pot you probably already own. Number 3. The moonflower vine. This is one of the most dramatic plants on this list, and also one of the most completely vanished from modern gardens. Moonflower is a vigorous climbing vine that produces enormous white, trumpet-shaped flowers, often 5 to 6 inches across, that only open at night. Grandmothers who grew moonflower would plant it near a porch, trellis, or window specifically so that on summer evenings, the flowers would unfurl right around dusk, and the fragrance, something between jasmine and gardenia, would drift through open windows after the heat of the day broke. It was, in a very real sense, evening entertainment, decades before anyone had a screen to look at after dinner. Here's the part that made it so practical despite how exotic it looks. Moonflower grows incredibly fast from seed, often climbing 15 feet or more in a single season, which made it perfect for quickly covering an ugly fence, a chain link section, or a bare trellis within just a few months. It also attracts moths and other night pollinators, which a lot of people don't think about, but which matters more than you'd expect for a healthy garden ecosystem. Modern gardeners forgot about moonflower, largely because nighttime gardening, as a concept, just isn't part of how most people think about their yards anymore. We plant for how a yard looks during the day, when neighbors and guests might see it, not for how it transforms after dark. There's also a practical reason it's harder to find at garden centers, since it's almost always grown from seed rather than sold as an already blooming plant. And most big box stores only stock what blooms on the shelf, so it sells itself. But if you have any kind of trellis, fence, or porch railing that looks bare, and you're willing to plant from seed and wait through early summer, moonflower turns an ordinary evening into something that feels almost ceremonial every single night it blooms. Number 2, the soap plant, more specifically yucca, or, in some regions, the actual soapwort plant your grandmother might have grown specifically for its roots or leaves. This is going to sound unusual, but stick with me, because it represents one of the most practical, self-sufficient plant uses that's almost completely disappeared. In many older households, certain plants weren't grown purely for decoration or food. They were grown as a household resource. The roots of yucca, when crushed and mixed with water, produce a natural lathering substance that was genuinely used as a gentle soap or shampoo alternative, particularly in rural households where buying commercial products wasn't always convenient or affordable. Soapwort works in a similar way, with its leaves and roots producing a natural saponin-rich lather when crushed and steeped in water. Grandmothers who grew these plants weren't doing it as some kind of trendy, natural living statement, the way it might get marketed today. It was simply practical. The plant was already growing in the yard, it served a genuine household function, and it cost nothing to use season after season. Here's why this earns such a high spot on the list. Both yucca and soapwort are remarkably hardy, drought-tolerant, and require essentially zero maintenance once established, which made them perfect for a household resource you wanted to be able to rely on without having to baby it. The reason this practice vanished is straightforward. Commercial soap and shampoo became cheap and universally available, and the knowledge of which plants could serve this function simply stopped getting passed down, generation by generation, until most people today have no idea their own yard could have produced something like this at all. If you're at all interested in old-fashioned self-sufficiency, this is one of the most overlooked examples of a plant doing double duty. Looking attractive in the garden while also serving a genuinely useful household purpose that most modern gardeners have never even heard of. And number 1, the rain lily. I'm putting this at the very top of the list because once you understand what it does, you'll wonder why it isn't in every single garden today. Rain lilies are small, unassuming bulbs that, for most of the year, just sit there as a modest patch of grass-like foliage, completely unremarkable. And then it rains. Within 24 to 48 hours of a good rainfall, especially after a dry spell, rain lilies send up delicate, crocus-like flowers in white, pink, or yellow, seemingly out of nowhere. Grandmothers loved this plant because it gave them a small, reliable moment of magic tied directly to the weather, a little reward that showed up predictably after every storm, without any work on her part at all. Here's what makes this plant remarkable, and why it earns the top spot. Rain lilies are essentially indestructible bulbs. They multiply on their own underground, spreading slowly into bigger and bigger clusters over the years, and they require absolutely no maintenance beyond simply existing in the ground. No fertilizing, no dividing, no winter protection in most climates. You plant the bulbs once, and then for the rest of your life, every time it rains, you get flowers a day or two later, like clockwork. Modern gardeners forgot about rain lilies because they don't fit the instant gratification model of garden center shopping. A rain lily bulb sitting in a nursery bin doesn't look like anything. No flowers, no obvious appeal, so almost nobody picks it up off the shelf. But the people who do plant it and then forget about it for a few years eventually get something that feels less like gardening and more like a quiet, recurring gift from their own yard. If there's one plant on this entire list that deserves to make a comeback in modern gardens, it's this one, because it asks for nothing and gives you something beautiful every single time the sky does what it was always going to do anyway. Alright, I promised you a bonus, and here it is. These are the 3 habits I think modern gardeners lost along the way that made all 9 of these plants work so effortlessly for previous generations. Habit 1. Planting things and simply leaving them alone. A huge amount of modern gardening involves constant intervention, daily checking, frequent fertilizing, frequent worrying. Grandmothers planted things that were suited to their specific climate and soil, and then largely let nature take its course, only stepping in when something was genuinely wrong. That restraint is, ironically, one of the hardest gardening skills to relearn. Habit 2. Saving and sharing seeds. Almost every plant on this list spreads or reseeds on its own, and older gardeners leaned into that instead of fighting it, collecting seeds at the end of the season and sharing them with neighbors and family. That's how so many of these plants survived for generations even after they disappeared from stores, because they were never dependent on stores in the first place. Habit 3. Matching the plant to the place instead of the place to the plant. Modern gardening often starts with picking a plant you like the look of, then trying to force your yard to accommodate it. Older gardeners tended to do the opposite, observing what already grew easily in their specific spot: sun, shade, dry, wet, and choosing plants that already matched those conditions. That single shift in thinking is probably responsible for more gardening success than any product or technique you could buy today. So there you have it, 9 plants your grandmother almost certainly grew that have quietly disappeared from most modern gardens, and a few of the habits that made them thrive without any real effort. None of these require special equipment, expensive soil amendments, or constant attention. They just require a little patience and a willingness to plant something that doesn't necessarily bloom the same week you buy it. If this brought back any memories or gave you an idea for your own yard, let me know in the comments which one you're most excited to try, and if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss what we're covering next week. Thanks for spending this time with me today, garden friend. Now get out there and grow something that lasts you a lifetime.